if you want to avoid a real hazardous place, don't build there. And so that's, again, this isn't a bunch of people coming together and doing a PhD dissertation on the issues, but it's important the breadth of voices that we had. And considering climate change, surprising as it may be, is really not in the radar screen for most people who are doing the kind of planning that we need them to do. We need, as political folk, to realize that it would actually be maybe appropriate in some places to say, don't build there. Don't rebuild there. Certainly, after experiences like Katrina, we should know where it is that perhaps we're most vulnerable and not rebuild in those places. Whether we're learning that lesson or not, I'll leave it up to you to tell me. But and finally, where it is most difficult or impossible or not even the best solution, let's at least provide incentives for people to give up the development rights for properties that are located in hazardous areas. This gets to the point of, if we are going to build, let's build it right. First of all, let's take climate change into consideration. We're putting tens of millions of dollars into infrastructure development. Let's think about new ways of developing infrastructure. And there are a lot of reasons, for example, to consider decentralized energy resources. There are some actual benefits on the mitigation of greenhouse gas side for solar, wind power, and some other fuel sources. But certainly in terms of our vulnerability, and this is true whether it's a terrorist attack or a hurricane, is being dependent on these huge energy plants, and then this intricate network of transmission lines makes us extremely vulnerable. Just a well-placed tree branch somewhere can darken a third of the country. And as we noted in something we read recently, a terrorist with a laptop and a shotgun could do the same thing very easily. The thing to keep in mind, too, with building standards is you want to make sure the roof stays on. You want to make sure that a building is built to accommodate floods that you know are going to happen. And, of course, folks who are not able to afford it need help to retrofit their properties to make them more resilient as well. And this is no surprise to anybody who has any inkling of what happened in New Orleans as a result of Katrina. If the Delta were as it was 100 or 150 or 200 years ago, storm surge impacts, flooding implications would have been far less. We know that well. The science community has been singing this tune for quite a long time. We need to make sure that protecting coastal natural infrastructure is an important part of our adaptation plans. And we need to build up and expand those programs that we already have in place and create new ones as necessary to make sure that we're protecting these places. And just to give you an example of where we as a country could learn things from places elsewhere, I think most of us think that Bangladesh, for example, is a basket case. Poor country, getting flooded all the time. We read about cyclones trashing their country, but they are investing a huge amount of technical and financial talent and effort to protect these huge masses of mangrove forests that they have growing along their coastline for good reason. Bangladesh every year suffers 70 to 77% flooding over its territory. It's just absolutely unbelievable. And one of the reasons that we don't hear about more deaths is because of this natural protective barrier from the Sundarbans, which is that massive mangrove forest that they are protecting very carefully and trying to restore to the extent that it's been compromised. One of the smart things we obviously need to do, and for some reason we're not very good at this, but in our planning, we need to be a lot less rigid. There's certainly enough to know about climate change and the threats along our coast to plan accordingly. What we do need to do is to be aware that our knowledge is going to improve with regards to climate impacts and to have plans for infrastructure development, community development, whatever it may be, that can adapt along with the increase in knowledge that we attain. And this is an interesting point here. When we were talking about ecosystem services and protecting ecosystem resources along the coast, the loudest proponents in our meetings for that was the reinsurance industry. We had TNC at the table, we had National Wildlife Federation at the table. They couldn't get a word out before the president of the Reinsurance Association of America said, we've got to protect those wetlands, we've got to protect those mangroves, we've got to keep those barrier islands in place. And the flip side was true here. The strongest proponents for a viable insurance marketplace were the folks from the National Wildlife Federation and the Nature Conservancy. And the reason that they enjoy this as much as a healthy insurance company would is that if you have pricing of insurance premiums that reflects the risk that's out there, A, you can maintain your business as an insurance company. It's not rocket science to realize that if you can get people to pay for the risk that they're facing, then you're going to be okay as an insurance company. But it also sends a very important signal. And I think we communicate best in this country, at least, through people's wallets. And so if you have risk along the coast that's priced appropriate in terms of insurance, then you're going to be creating a great incentive for people to do the risk mitigation that's required, either not to develop in a certain place that's particularly hazardous, or to find ways of reducing the threat and risk and vulnerability that they face by putting storm shutters on, doing all sorts of other things. Elevating, of course, is another big building technique. And here's another place where government needs to step in and help people who are low income deal with the challenges. For example, having lived in a place where its risk is increasing for a while, because these prices do need to rise quite a bit in order to reflect the risk. And the reason they don't right now is the insurance marketplace is regulated at the state level, regulated by people who are very susceptible to political pressure. And when insurance companies come in and say, we have calculated what the risk is in your particularly low-lying coastal area, those prices go way up. And some of you probably are experiencing that yourselves. Property that you've got that's somewhere close to the coast, the price pressure is going up, but it's not going up as far as it could in most states because there's a lot of pressure to keep those prices under control. Perfect example of that would be Florida, which has an insurance program, which is insurance of last resort, which happens to be the largest insurer in the state of Florida, and which is partly the largest insurer because of the political pressure to keep prices down. A governor who's down there right now who actually got elected largely because he made that commitment to folks. And they are going to go broke next time the big storm comes. And the way they handle that is anybody who has any kind of insurance policy in Florida, whether it's a car, whether you're in Orlando, is going to get slammed with a surcharge of who knows how many $100 for every insurance payment for as long as it takes to recoup the losses that are incurred in the next big storm. And finally, it's pretty clear that we also need to have a lot more climate wisdom and risk wisdom in terms of who's making what investments where. And this is particularly true in the real estate arena, where we have still billions, and as you can see, trillions of dollars invested in places where we really ought to give some more careful thought as to the wisdom of those investments. What we haven't been able to do yet is get through to them significantly to help them to appreciate the implications of these risks on their portfolios. The folks that work with Ceres get it, but the people who are really behind the wave of coastal investing have not yet. And I would say that for us as a society is the next big challenge. I will say that banks and lenders in Europe, for example, much more on board with this, much more aware of it, and trying hard to understand it better than we are in this country. So with that, I think what would probably be the most appropriate thing to do is to entertain questions. And I hope I haven't butchered the science too badly, but I know that if I have, there'll be some folks here who could probably help me out with that. But at any rate, I would invite you, if you don't have your very own copy of this report, it's very short, it's only 9 pages with a lot of white space and pictures and all sorts of good stuff. We had to make it CEO readable, which of course makes it readable for all the rest of us as well. So by all means, feel free to go to either of our websites to get a copy. Thank you very much.